Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to talk about a subject that I'm passionate about, but not many of you might be familiar with. And this is maintenance, but not as you may know it. Let me introduce myself. I work for National Museums Liverpool, and if any of you are visiting our city for the first time, welcome, and I'd encourage you to visit one of our 7 wonderful venues whilst you have the opportunity whilst here. I'm based in World Museum, just down the road, curating botanical collections. Now, when I mention to people outside the museum that I curate botanical collections, they sometimes start asking me about their houseplants, say going yellow, or they're dropping their leaves, or their fresh herbs on their windowsill keep drooping. But I have to stop them there. It's best not ask me about those questions, because I'm not very good at keeping things alive. But I can keep dead things dead for a very long time. What do I mean by those dead things? I'm talking about natural history specimens in museums, and specifically I'm talking about maintaining biological specimens, so not geological material. That's another talk. So keeping them dead. What do I mean by that? Well, these collections are organic, they're biodegradable, and these are 2 really positive words, and rightly so. Because in nature, this happens. And we want this to happen, because if it would be a very cluttered world if every living thing never disappeared, never decomposed, and of course all of this matter is the nourishment, it's the food, it becomes the natural fertilizer of another generation of animal, plant, or fungi, though not necessarily its own species, but it literally is the circle of life. Now back to natural history collections, we don't want this to happen. We want to keep them and we want to maintain them. But before I talk about how we do that, I think it's best to talk about why. You may have spotted my Twitter handle, Herbarium Donna. And this is another thing that I'm sometimes asked to explain. Just what is a herbarium? Well, essentially, a herbarium is a collection of dried, pressed plants that have been labelled, arranged, and stored systematically. You could call it a library of plants. And you won't find them often on display, though we do try and get them out where possible. And personally, I think they're incredibly beautiful objects. Their main purpose, however, and what they were created for, is research, and they provide a physical, tangible record for, say, a given species from a certain locality at a certain period of time. Our herbarium collection in Liverpool amounts to 400,000 specimens. These date from the mid-1700s through to contemporary material collected today. It not only covers the British flora, but it reflects Liverpool's port history and is rich in material collected worldwide from early voyages and explorative expeditions. As well as pressed specimens held on sheets, herbarium collections also hold many other items. These include seed collections and economical specimens such as medicinal and edible plants, fibres and timbers. Herbaria may also hold fungi specimens, and this type of collection gets the great title of a fungarium. Associated botanical archives also form part of a herbarium collection, and these include botanical prints, drawings, anatomical models, and collection notebooks. But I'm here to talk about those dead things, and here's the advocacy bit. Why are they important? Well, they are an important resource for ecologists, scientists, geographers, and historians. They form a source of information about plants, where they're found, what chemicals they have in them, when they flower, and actually just what they look like. They can also be used to provide samples of DNA and validate scientific observations. At National Museums Liverpool, the herbarium sits within the natural science or natural history collection, and that term is interchangeable. And here's a brief summary of that collection. Now, as curators, conservators, collection managers, we develop our collections through acquisition and research. We document them, and importantly, we make them accessible, be that for the research community or the public via exhibition. We care and maintain them for longevity. We act as custodians of these collections. And it is one area of this maintenance element of museum work that I'm going to describe today. So let's start by something that being a dead specimen, be it a plant, animal or fungus. In nature, factors such as light and temperature and humidity, agents such as mold and insects, they all have a part to play in decomposing organic matter. But an unnatural intervention happens when we choose to preserve a specimen. The procedure and method for this intervention differs depending on what it actually is and what it's to become. For example, pressed, pinned, skinned, mounted, or pickled. This itself is an unnatural halt on proceedings, stopping the decomposition and artificially freeze-framing them in time. But even this preserved material needs ongoing maintenance. Collections can be decades, hundreds of years old, and we want them to be around for hundreds to come. Just as in other professions, part of successful management is exercising effective risk assessment, and in museum collection management, we talk about the 10 agents of deterioration. These are the main factors to consider that might be detrimental to the protection and longevity of an object or specimen. You may have seen these on galleries when visiting a museum. These are monitoring environmental conditions, temperature and humidity, and in some cases light levels too. Why? Well, they are some of the 10 agents, and all can have an adverse effect. These agents may also be the catalyst to another of those 10 agents, and that is infestation. Integrated pest management is a term originally adopted by the agricultural industry and is now widely used and plays a fundamental role in collection management, but not just within the natural science sector. All insect species play an important ecological role in our natural environment. However, they become a pest when they start eating something that we don't want them to. Who would think that something so small could do so much damage? They can literally destroy our precious heritage. They feed on fur, feather, cellulose. All this organic matter is at risk of damage. Beautiful pinned drawers of insects can be reduced to dust. Butterfly and bat wings destroyed. Bird feathers stripped bare to their skeletal form. Delicate flowers and seeds crumbled away. And these are two of the pests which are on our most wanted list. Their common names, Biscuit Beetle and Carpet Beetle, give a good indication of what they like to eat. Now this one here on your left, this is the real enemy of the collection that I primarily have responsibility for maintaining, and that is those dried, dead press things. In the food industry, the biscuit beetle's really not welcome in storage units and packing factories of dried foodstuffs. For example, cereals, pastas, pulses, and of course biscuits. Well, the same goes for a museum storeroom full of dried plant material. This is a veritable Christmas dinner for a biscuit beetle, potentially a banquet. And we know when they've eaten well, not just because of what's disappeared, but because of what we find left behind. Frass, or insect poo, and that's what that is in there in the corner. And you can get really good at distinguishing between those loose seeds on a herbarium sheet and insect droppings. The key parts of integrated pest management, or IPM, are control and monitoring. Now, in the past, different control methods have been used on natural history collections. Sorry. The specimen might have been treated at the time of actual preparation, for example, taxidermy mounts with arsenic and herbarium sheets with mercuric chloride. Therefore, we've got to be extremely careful in handling historic collections. And as we're here today in the Fabric District, I think it's pertinent to mention why that character in Alice in Wonderland was called the Mad Hatter. Mercury was widely used in the millinery industry, and prolonged exposure can cause neurological damage. Naphthalene and dichlorophenbenzene were also previously used to protect organic items, and these are no longer used in our museum for safety reasons. However, I still remember the strong smell of these chemicals in our collection stores when I first started working in museums over 25 years ago. Sometimes if I get the odd sniff of this again, still lingering in our wooden cabinets, it can make me feel strangely nostalgic. These days, we freeze our collections. Freezing is carried out both as a treatment for infestation and as a preventative quarantine measure. We take the temperature down to -28 over a number of days, and this kills the pests. We do this for any specimen that temporarily leaves and re-enters the store. For example, they might have been out on display on the public gallery or been loaned and transported off-site to another institution for researchers to consult. Any new specimens coming into the museum are quarantined and treated before they can be incorporated into the main collection. Any specimens to be frozen have to be wrapped airtight in polythene, preventing any condensation, because we don't want them getting wet. Remember what that mold can do. The largest quarantining freeze I dealt with was when we had to station our whole collection off-site for 3 years while building work was being carried out at the museum. The entire botanical and zoological collections had to be packed and frozen. To do this, we hired a large freezer trailer, the type that you'd normally see moving food up and down the motorway. This took numerous weeks, freezing hundreds of batches of palleted boxes at a time. Control can be also as basic as trying to maintain an environment where pests aren't welcome. So that can be as simple as keeping an area clean, good housekeeping, and also limiting the places where food can be consumed. And above all, monitoring the situation is key to good pest management. These are sticky traps, or sometimes called blunder traps, because an insect literally just wanders onto it. Pheromone or attractant traps are sometimes used also. As part of the museum's accreditation scheme in the UK, an institution must have a collection care and conservation plan in place, which includes arrangements for pest management and inspection. The sticky traps are routinely checked and their contents identified and documented. Any incidents of acute pest presence can then be acted upon. Sometimes we might not see the adult beetle on a trap, and sometimes it's the discovery of that frass that I mentioned earlier that alerts us to a problem. The first thing we do is investigate the source of the infestation. This needs to be isolated and dealt with first. And then affected specimens are cleaned and frass carefully removed with any damaged parts of the specimen. Storage cabinets are carefully vacuumed. And here's me in my Ghostbuster stance. Though I'm not removing spirits, I am trying to make sure that any potential threats, even if they can't be seen, are carefully cleared away. And even the vacuumed contents are carefully disposed of external to the building, because there'd be no point in doing this for the pests to just come out of the bin inside the museum. Small infestations and quarantines can be dealt with on-site in the freezer that we run in our department. But when a large volume of material needs to be dealt with, we send that over to our city centre facility that has a large walk-in freezer. And this is big enough to, say, hold a lion or a zebra, if necessary. And after that, well, the collections need to be defrosted, unpacked, and reinstated into their cabinets. So that's just a small peek into the world behind the scenes at the museum. and I hope gives you an insight into a very important element of collection maintenance of this valuable resource. I'm around all day, so if anyone wants to chat museum collections further, I'm very happy to do so. Thank you.